Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Mustafa with you from Noor Art Company. Would really appreciate at the beginning and Jazakumullah khair for accepting Noor Art webinar invitation and in joining us in Health and Wellness Level 2 webinar presented by the author of Health and Wellness series, in fact, Dr. Amber Khan, who has been a dedicated Muslim youth health educator for the past 10 years. MashaAllah, she currently lives in Michigan and taught in many places, MashaAllah, including the Family and Youth Institute and Islamic Medical Association of North America. Inshallah, the webinar will be scheduled for an hour and a half. The first hour should be like a presentation by Dr. Amber, and then inshallah, and during the webinar, the first hour, she will post like some questions and open discussion. If you have any questions after she finalize like each unit of the book. And then the last 30 minutes should be like an open discussion as well. If you have any questions, you can ask the doctor directly by raising your hands. So we can give you the ability to speak with the author directly and ask her if you have any questions. Or all the time, you can post your questions in the Q&A section, inshallah. We can answer your questions as well in the Q&A section, or we can ask the author and she can answer your questions even if you didn't ask her like verbally or by raising your hands. طيب inshallah, with no further delay, inshallah, let's begin with Dr. Amber. Dr. Amber, inshallah, if you're ready, go ahead, and thank you for your time, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Firstly, Jazakallah khair, and thank you to the Noor Art team for organizing the webinar this morning. Thank you all of the attendees today. As mentioned, I'm Sister Amber. I've written a health book series called Health and Wellness from the Islamic Perspective. It is for the ages, generally speaking, 11 and up. And this series, it aims to provide our Islamic institutions, our Islamic schools, our weekend Islamic schools, our masjid youth programming, as well as at home between a parent and a child. This series aims to provide them with a comprehensive health curriculum from the Islamic perspective. It is a comprehensive health curriculum, which means that it includes many different areas of health, social health, mental health, physical, sexual, reproductive, and even spiritual health as well. This book, it aims to tackle the ages of 11 and up, as mentioned. And last time we recorded a session giving an overview of level 1. You'll be able to find it on the Noor Art website. Today, we will be focusing on everything that is inside level 2. Now for level 1, it already went into the level 1 webinar, already discussed what is in the introductory section. And all of the levels include the same introductory section. So I won't go into too much detail on that, but I just wanted to highlight a few things. And if you'd like more information on the intro section, please check out level 1 webinar. But the introductory section, just very briefly, it does focus on the topic of haya, that the main quality or character needed to learn about health from the Islamic perspective is haya. There are a lot of different health topics that can be very sensitive and uncomfortable for students to learn about. For many of them, it may be their first time or their first exposure to learning about these types of topics. And so some students or even parents or even schools, teachers, the masjid, may fear and worry about teaching health because of these topics, because maybe it's uncomfortable. And as a result, health for youth has not really been a very important topic within our institutions for many reasons, but primarily for that reason. This can lead to several consequences and risks when we choose not to teach health from the Islamic perspective. Many of them are mentioned here, and this is in the intro section so that our youth understand the importance of this series, that when we fail to learn about health, we may be putting ourselves at risk of poor health, having improper hygiene practices, We may be seeking out unreliable resources like the internet, TV. We may be asking other people, easily believing incorrect information passed around, certain cultural beliefs, being more likely to engage in risky behaviors when we don't know the consequences behind them, misunderstanding concepts like consent and body boundaries. And for some individuals, they may suffer in silence. They may have a lot of health questions, or maybe dealing with a health issue, or maybe dealing with, wanting to ask Islamic questions regarding health issues and not knowing where to turn and where to go. Research from several Muslim-based organizations, they have found that a lack of health education in our Islamic institutions has led to these consequences, that we are seeing these consequences in our community. This was covered in depth in the webinar on the Noor Art website that introduces the health curriculum. It's called Introducing the New Health and Wellness Curriculum. It explains why I decided to write this series, and it focuses heavily on these types of consequences. And I'll go through it very briefly, but if you would like more detail, please check that webinar out. But some studies have found, such as the Family and Youth Institute, and these results are based on the sample study that they had on their participant study. And of the participants in this study, it found that over half of American Muslims at the college age have engaged in premarital relations. And there was another study done by Dr. Sobia Ali Faisal, and the participants in her study, she found that Muslims between the ages of 17 and 35, that over 67% have already engaged in premarital relations. It's not enough to tell our youth that premarital relations or zina is haram, but we need to teach why. What are the consequences? What are the mental risks, the physical risks, the social risks, the spiritual risks that come with engaging in what is haram? And also explaining the how. How can we control our desires? How can we avoid peer pressure in the society that we live in? The lead researcher of the study, by Dr. Samir Ahmed, she says, and I quote, that there's a false assumption that Muslim kids are protected by their faith and religious practice and not engaging in premarital relations. We need to sometimes have tough conversations, or maybe have uncomfortable conversations within our institutions as a means of being able to address some of the issues that our youth are dealing with. Other studies have found, and this is also an FYI study based on the participants in their study, that over 59% of Muslim youth view pornography and struggle with pornography addiction. Another study by the FYI based on the participants of their study have also looked at high rates of drug experimentation and drug use within the Muslim community or within the college age, as well as tobacco and hookah use. This is a study by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding. And while we look at the rates being quite low in the Muslim community versus other religious communities, that still it's quite high that a Muslim knows a person or personally struggles with drug addiction. This is a study that was done by Pew Research, a peer-reviewed study that found that over 50% of Muslim youth or those at the millennial age are supportive of the LGBTQ agenda. And Brother Moveen Vaid and Dr. Wahid Jensen, who are subject knowledge experts on the field of sexual and gender identity from the Islamic perspective, and really at the forefront of explaining, they mentioned in one of their papers, The Male is Not Like the Female, that we need curriculum from the Islamic perspective to teach our youth that they're all they're hearing is the LGBTQ narrative, that there is an Islamic narrative, and we need our institutions to be providing that on a curriculum level. The purpose of this, and this is in much more detail in the webinar on the introduction of why I wrote this series, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of teaching our youth health from the Islamic perspective, that we can give our youth the tools to make healthy decisions, and it can be a means of preventive intervention of risky behaviors. This is also a study that looks at some of the mental health issues within the Muslim community by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, seeing high rates of bullying due to their Muslim identity. This is another study done by the Family and Youth Institute, which found very similarly high rates of poor mental health, anxiety issues, feelings of depression for Muslim youth who feel discriminated based on their Muslim identity. And there are some Muslim youth as well, 1 out of 4, that have doubts within their faith. And what was interesting about this study was that it found that it wasn't the theology of Islam, but it was the identity that comes with it, having to deal with American culture and the American society, and how a lot of it contrasts with the Islamic way of life. And finally, this is just a beautiful article that was written by ISPU that talks to you as Muslim educators, that you are valuable in these conversations, that you really are at the forefront of being able to make these changes, to change these statistics when you have these types of conversations and you plug in to the interests of our youth that are dealing with these types of issues. Our institutions, Islamic institutions, we are quite behind when it comes to teaching health education. Almost every single public school and a majority of private schools offer a health education and a health curriculum, but many of our Islamic institutions do not. And subhanAllah, we have so much health within our faith that we could really incorporate that we fail to do so when it comes to tarbiyah. So this is why I wrote the series, and this is also why I chose to highlight this in the introductory section of youth about the risks of not learning this information. And I speak directly to youth in the intro, and I say to them that you probably haven't had many of these conversations around health in your Islamic school, in your masjid, maybe even in your own household. And so while these conversations may be uncomfortable, don't let that discomfort prevent you from seeking knowledge. Learn with haya. Ask questions with haya, engage in discussions with haya. Follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Sahaba who would ask these types of questions, encompassing haya. And then the rest of the introductory section goes into some tips and tools and guidelines on how to create a classroom that embodies haya when learning these topics. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview that we didn't discuss too much in the level 1 webinar. Any questions before we move on to the actual content in level 2? Any questions or comments? Okay, alhamdulillah, we'll go ahead and move forward. So now we are going to move on to what is inside level 2. Level 2 includes 3 chapters, and they all fall under the health topic or health category or unit of reproductive and sexual health. What is reproductive and sexual health? Now, reproductive health, it refers to the conditions of the male and female reproductive system. In simple terms, it simply means how the reproductive systems work, how the male and female reproductive systems work, how they differ from each other, and how they actually work together. Sexual health refers to a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. SubhanAllah, when writing this series and as teaching it to our youth, there is no other religion that has provided sexual and reproductive health education than Islam. And we don't acknowledge and take advantage of this enough within our Islamic institutions. And so, inshallah, with this resource, hopefully it will be able to incorporate this very sensitive topic from the Islamic perspective in your classrooms. Now, level 2 is appropriate for the ages 11 and up. You may find in your community starting earlier may be appropriate for your community, and we leave that for you to decide. But level 2 does not go into too much detail on sexual topics. That's really reserved for another level, level 5. Level 5 also discusses reproductive and sexual health, but more at a higher age level and a higher developmental age level. So level 2 is a great starting point to begin the discussion of a child transforming towards adulthood. And it includes the following 3 chapters. Chapter 1, puberty. Chapter 2, reproduction and menstruation, and Chapter 3, hygiene. So let's take a look at Chapter 1 first. The outline for the Chapter 1 puberty includes the following. It includes 4 sections. Section 1 is the onset of puberty, basically how puberty begins. The remaining 3 sections break down the topic of puberty changes into Section 2, the physical changes of puberty, Section 3, the mental changes of puberty, and Section 4, the spiritual changes of puberty. Section 1 opens up the topic of puberty to our youth about how far they have developed from birth until now, that they have developed physically, mentally, and Islam has grown with you during that time. That as you grow physically and mentally, you are also growing spiritually. It highlights to youth that when you were young, when you were a baby, you would experience the world by learning about it through your senses. You also became very well aware of the physical differences between males and females at a young age, that according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, a child as young as 2 years old can distinguish a male from a female. They know that females carry babies and can feed them, but males can't. That males can grow beards, but females can't. That males and females have different privacy parts and look different ways. So this is a distinction that, subhanAllah, youth can recognize at a very young age. And in this stage, Islam has provided your parents with the guidance to teach you about respect and privacy for your body as well as for others. And one of the ways that Islam does this is that it teaches parents to teach you to seek permission before entering your parents' room at specific times of the day, 3 particular times of the day: before the morning prayer, when changing one's clothes at noon, and after the night prayer. This is all centered around the concept of body boundaries and consent and respect for each other's personal space. This is all taught to a child at a young age. Growing with the child is at the age of 7. They are given spiritual responsibility as they are developing. And Allah has commanded that they start learning how to pray at the age of 7. By age 10 and up, your understanding as youth has increased. And with these changes, Allah has instilled more rulings on you, that you are now to engage in the 5 daily prayers regularly, that you are to seek permission at all times before you enter another person's private space or private room, and they are to give you the same respect, that you are to sleep by yourself or have separate bedding, and that finally you are required to start seeking knowledge. This is all at the age of 10. This development, your physical, mental, and spiritual development over those young years, is a means of preparing you for your greatest development of all, and that is puberty. Puberty starts at different ages, depending on your gender, your genetics, your diet, your environment, but on average, it begins at the ages of 9 and 14 for girls and 12 and 15 for boys. This section mentions very simply and briefly how puberty starts. I've noticed that youth really like to have an understanding of what's happening and why it's happening. So I give them a brief overview, and I've shared an image that we've created in order to explain it in that way, that puberty begins when an area in your brain sends a message to your reproductive organs, telling them to start releasing hormones that are going to change you from a child into an adult. And of course, there is text to help supplement and provide that detail. There then is a distinction between how that occurs for males from females. So we see here on the male side that the transformation from boys to men, that hormones are going to travel to the male reproductive organs or the testicles, and 2 messages are going to be sent. First is the message to start making testosterone. Testosterone is the hormone that is going to cause the male child, to develop body hair, increased height, a deeper voice, bigger muscles, etc., also given the big name secondary sex characteristics. The other message that is sent to the male reproductive organs is to start producing sperm. And this is what's going to enable a child to one day be able to have a baby one day, also known as fertility. Very similarly is what goes on with the girls, except it's a different hormone. It is estrogen. That estrogen is going to be sent to the female reproductive organs, or in other words, the ovaries, leading to the appearance changing from a girl to a woman, such as hip size, increased height, the development of breasts, menstruation, and also the release of eggs from the ovaries that will lead to fertility. So this is just a brief overview, and then we move on to section 2. Section 2 goes into the physical changes of puberty. It first discusses what those secondary sex characteristics are. The secondary sex characteristics, they are what transform a boy to look like a man and a girl to look like a woman. And these characteristics, they occur in stages known as Tanner stages, and there are 5 of them. And this image here is a chart that breaks down the transformation and what occurs in each stage for the males, and similarly what occurs on the females. That way, both genders, they understand what's going on with them and how it compares to what's going on with the other gender. So just very briefly there, you see the 5 different stages. You have the stage 1 for the males beginning at age 10. You have the release of hormones. Stage 2 is now we're seeing reproductive growth. Stage 3 is where one starts to see their voices changing. They may start developing nocturnal emissions. Stage 4 is now even more body hair growth, voice development, reproductive growth. Stage 5, finishing off with that. And usually at that point, the stages are concluded and puberty is finished. On the girls' side, they begin a little earlier, around age 9, stage 1, receiving those hormones to the reproductive organs. Stage 2 is breast development, body hair growth. Stage 3 is more body hair growth, increased in height. This is why girls tend to be taller than boys in the middle school time period, because they are a little bit step ahead when it comes to puberty. Stage 4 is where females may start to develop their first period. And stage 5 is all of those changes now finalizing and finishing off. The second major physical change is fertility. Fertility means being able to have a baby one day. And a baby means when sperm from a male combines with an egg from a female inside the female body through the process known as sexual intercourse. Now, this is a very simplistic definition of sexual intercourse. It is given the definition based on a biological and reproductive standpoint. A much more direct and explicit definition will be provided in level 5. Now, often youth tend to ask, how do I know? Because how do I know if I become fertile? Can one tell? And you absolutely can. That a male knows he's fertile when sperm starts to be produced. And a physical sign of that is when they start developing a release of fluid that was never released before when they were a child from the private organ. So this is one of the signs of puberty for a male, or fertility for a male, is the release of fluid. Similarly, for a female is when she starts her menses, when she starts her menstruation, that this is a sign that an egg is now being released every single month. And if that egg is not fertilized, it will be removed from the body through the process of menstruation. So this is a sign that your bodies are now within the stages of fertility. This stage then ends and concludes with pointing out that fertility is a major aspect of moving towards adulthood. And when you reach this stage, you become intellectually and spiritually responsible for learning about reproduction, about its process, and the spiritual rulings surrounding it. So this is just a brief overview to understand that responsibility. And then there is an activity that's included just to kind of ensure that our youth have a good understanding and grasp of these changes. Moving on to section 3, one of the major aspects or the biggest change of puberty is actually the mental changes. We tend to focus a lot on the physical changes, but mental changes tend to be the biggest change of puberty. There are a lot of mental changes that occur in puberty, and most of them are going to be discussed throughout all of the levels. We'll notice this when we get to level 3. It focuses mostly on those mental changes. But there's one particular mental change that I wanted to highlight in this chapter and focus on and hone in on, and that is the development of sexual attraction, because it connects very closely with those physical changes. Sexual attraction, and the definition that is provided in the text, states that it's when a person desires to be physically and emotionally close to another person, so much so that it makes them become excited and nervous when they're near them or when they think about them. And this makes sense because in order for fertility to occur, one needs to have a desire for another person. So biologically, it makes sense. Feeling attracted to another person is a key sign, and we tell our youth that you are transforming from a child towards adulthood. These feelings are normal and they're expected. They are part of your biological makeup that Allah has bestowed on His creation. This text then goes into, even though it is normal, you now have a responsibility to learn how to control these feelings. So the rest of the text then goes into, how does one control feelings of sexual attraction? Sexual attraction leads to feelings of a desire to be touched or to touch others, and giving in to these feelings is permissible after marriage. we want to protect our youth from feeling sexual guilt or sexual shame, saying things like these feelings are bad or they're wrong or they're dirty or they're haram. We want to avoid saying these types of terms. This can really stay with you. They could impact their future marriage. And this is biologically, they have no control over these feelings. Rather, we ought to promote that sexual acts within a marriage are to be based on love and care and trust and responsibility for another person. We want to instill a sense of excitement to fulfill this desire when you do get married. That to do so outside of marriage, it's not something that is actually enjoyable, right? That this is impermissible in Islam and it's prohibited due to the many potential harms and risks involved. But until you are ready to get married, it's important to learn how to control these feelings. And the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has given you many tools on how to do that. Islam is a preventive faith. What that means is that Allah doesn't just say something is haram and leave you to figure it out. Right? He gives you tools and advice on how to avoid that haram. And so some examples when it comes to sexual attraction include, number one, is the importance of lowering your gaze. That during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a young companion, Al-Fadil. He saw a Muslim girl he was attracted to, and he started staring at her. And at this, the Prophet ﷺ, he took the back of his hand and he moved Al-Fadil's face to the other direction. This hadith and this incident, it shows that firstly, when you stare at someone you are sexually attracted to, it increases your sexual desire. Secondly, staring at others, it can make them feel uncomfortable. In this above hadith, Rasul alayhi salam, he didn't scold the woman, tell her to go away, tell her to cover up. Instead, he alayhi salam teaches Al-Fadil that you have an individual responsibility to control your gaze. That if you live in a secular society and people can dress and act however they want, that it's not on them, it's on you to learn to lower your gaze. And so this highlights this story here. Another tip is the importance of fasting, that it can encourage self-control, choosing good company, choosing friends that have the same moral values as you, that a friend who tries to show you inappropriate videos or text or message someone you're attracted to, they're not really looking out for your best interest. There also is a box that does highlight the dangers of what one looks at online, that we don't just lower our gaze in person, but we also are to lower our gaze in the digital world as well, right? Being mindful of what we choose to view online and look at online, that we will be held accountable for that as well. And then another tip is making dua. Always turning to Allah if you are struggling with one of His rulings. If you do make a mistake, if you do slip up, never fear to turn back to Allah and seek His forgiveness. The remaining part of this section goes into how one is to interact with the opposite gender, with those who are non-mahram. So firstly, the text defines what mahram means, that a mahram is someone of the opposite gender that you are related to, like a sibling, a niece, a maternal uncle, someone who doesn't have sexual feelings like a child, and then of course, one's future spouse. That the rulings of interacting with a mahram, those rulings are softened because a mahram, you are to feel safe with them and comfortable around them. That being said, it's important to highlight, and I highlight this in the text, that if you don't feel safe or you don't trust being alone with a mahram, then you don't have to, and you are encouraged to tell a trusted adult. The reason why this is highlighted here is because most cases of child sexual abuse involve a mahram. So we don't want to give the impression to our youth that, yes, you can be alone with your mahram and that the rulings of awra are softened. While these are all true, that we also want to empower our youth to know that if you don't feel comfortable in that setting or someone is taking advantage of being a mahram to you in that type of way, that you have the right to protect yourself. So there is a box and an explanation on consent even amongst mahram. Everyone else, who is the opposite gender to you, cousin, a sister-in-law, an uncle through marriage, a stranger is non-mahram. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, non-mahrams would interact with each other often, but they incorporated conditions when it came to that interaction. And some examples are mentioned here. Number one, or tips on that interaction include that their interactions were focused on a purpose. They met to share knowledge, to ask questions, to give advice. In other words, the interactions, they didn't include unnecessary or personal questions. And so there are some examples that are mentioned here. Number two is that these interactions, they never occurred alone. They always occurred in the presence of others. And number three is that they kept to their personal space when it came to lowering the gaze, when it came to not touching each other, or when it comes to handshakes or hugging, or when it comes to even modesty in one's dress or modesty in one's mannerisms and behavior and tone of voice, that this was also included in those types of interactions. So therefore, we teach our youth that, when you're working on a school project or you're organizing a community event, it's permissible to act with non-mahrams or interact with them when we uphold these types of guidelines. And then the final section in this chapter is on the spiritual changes. This is really the section that separates a puberty talk in an Islamic setting from a secular setting, because you can learn puberty when you go to any school, a public school, for example, or you can watch a video on YouTube, and usually they're very well done. They're medically accurate. They're very comprehensive, but they don't include that Islamic framework. We see how important it is to include that with our youth, especially this section. According to Islamic law, a Muslim has reached puberty when one of the following signs appear: if they've experienced a nocturnal emission, if they start developing coarse pubic hair, if they have their first menstrual period, or if they've reached the age of 15. That when you show one of these signs by the latest of age 15, you are now on the path towards adulthood in Islam. And this is a very important step in Islam, because this means that you are now going to be held accountable in front of Allah. Now, when you reach puberty, we tell our youth that you naturally desire independence, that you want more responsibility. You start to rely less on your parents, you rely more on yourself, you feel capable to take on more challenges, to think for yourself, to make your own decisions. And this is a huge part of preparing for self-accountability. And parents should encourage this and should give you space to be more independent, that parents are to offer you guidance and support, but also give you outlets to become more independent. We see during the time of the Prophet ﷺ that some of the young Sahaba were given an increased level of responsibility, that the Prophet ﷺ trusted Asma bin Abi Bakr radiallahu anha at the age of 15 with the secret of the Hijrah, that he chose Osama bin Zayd radiallahu anh at the age of 17 to become a lead commander of an army. And so we as parents or as teachers are to emulate that as well when we see our youth striving for that responsibility and we feel they're capable. There is a great sense of excitement that comes with newfound independence, but it does come with challenges. And so we remind our youth that one is learning to hold yourself accountable. Accountability means accepting responsibility for your actions and your decisions. And as Muslims, this is one of the core issues in our faith, that once you enter adulthood, your actions are now going to be recorded in your book and will be presented to you on the day of judgment. You will be asked about each and every action you did. And so a very common questions that a lot of youth will ask when we talk about this is, well, what if I feel like I don't know enough about Islam to be held accountable? Learning how to hold yourself accountable is not something that happens overnight. It takes time. You're still learning who you are, your personality, your desires, your ability to control your emotions. You're also learning about other people, their opinions, their emotions, their social skills, their culture, their religious views. So talking with your family, as they know you best out of anyone else, can really help you learn more about yourself and how to deal with others in appropriate ways. It's also important to teach our youth that a Muslim is not held accountable for what they don't know. So if you do something wrong unknowingly, Allah is merciful to you. But you are not allowed to stay in that state of ignorance either. Your accountability, you're accountable for that too, right? You are required to seek knowledge. As an adult Muslim, you must make an active effort to seek knowledge. And who you turn to for knowledge is important. It's not uncommon for adolescents to seek advice from their friends or to go to the internet, but this can lead to a lot of incorrect information. And so it is key to acquire knowledge backed up with evidence, have scholars, imams, leadership within your community, people that you can turn to when you have questions or need advice. And then finally is teaching our youth, well, what if they do something and what if I commit a sin knowingly? I know it's wrong and I do it anyway. It's important we teach our youth that committing a sin, it is a natural part of being a human. And so therefore our focus should be decreasing the quantity of our sins, increasing the quality of our forgiveness. So the rest of this section goes into teaching our youth about how to seek forgiveness appropriately to Allah, as well as to any other person that we may have harmed. And then part B in section 4 goes into the topic of modesty. Modesty is about humility before Allah, and it's a key characteristic in Islam. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that every religion has a quality characteristic of that religion, and the characteristic of Islam is modesty. This section mentions the two types of modesty, outer and inner modesty. The first section goes into the outer rulings of modesty for women. It goes into the details of awra in the presence of those who are non-mahram, those who are mahram, those in the presence of women. It talks about clothing needing to be loose that covers the entire body and the evidence behind that, as well as the headscarf or the khimar as well. On Surah Nur, verse 31, that take your khumur, plural for khimar, and wrap it over your chest or your jubihinna. And how this was exemplified during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that many of the women of Jahiliyyah, they already covered their hair as they would emulate the people of the book, the women of the people of the book, yet they would tie it back. And so this verse is teaching the Muslim woman to, instead of throwing it back, to wrap it over the chest. There is also a box that talks about, well, this verse says the word khimar, and today we call it hijab. And so what is the distinction in this meaning? So this box talks a little bit about what hijab literally means and the semantics and how the wording has changed in today's time to imply headscarf. And that's just a normal aspect of when language develops. But it's important that we understand what these terms literally mean so we can have an understanding of the tafsir or when we are reading the Quran. And then finally, the section for women, it talks about who one is to be modest in front of, and then other areas of modesty, such as when it comes to wearing makeup, jewelry, fragrances, or using perfume, about nails, about hair, about facial and body hair. And so there's a chart that goes in to that. The final part of this section goes into the rulings for modest dress for men, that the awra is between the navel and the knee, covering more is better. There is also a chart as well on facial hair, body hair, fragrance, or using cologne, jewelry. A lot of men wear chains and have earrings in today's time, so the ruling on that. And there also is a box that gives an example of male modesty, which is Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh. This is a beautiful story and some examples about Uthman radiallahu anh, and he was known for his modesty during the time of Jahiliyyah and continued to have very modest, was very modest even in the times of Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ praising him for that. The ending of this section then talks a little bit about the concept or the topic of choice and modesty. That modest dress is a required ruling in Islam for both men and women. And men and women are different, and so that's why the rulings of modesty are different. That being said, it is impermissible to force a person to follow a ruling of Allah. That humans, we are created with free will, and free will comes with the choice to obey or disobey a ruling of Allah. And as an act of spiritual devotion, you have to choose it or it's meaningless, right? If a Muslim does not uphold to a ruling of Allah, that is their choice, but we are as an ummah to give each other their excuses. Maybe they're unaware of the ruling. Maybe this is a ruling they're struggling with. Maybe this is something which they're working towards. And so we want to give people that space to grow. There's also some charts that were made by the Institute of Social Policy that talk about why Muslim women choose to be modest, that they do it for the sake of Allah. It talks a little bit about some comparisons of those of other faiths as well. And then some common remarks that some youth give and some guidance for them, such as, I feel modest dress limits me, such as, when I wear modest dress when I'm playing sports at school, or, as I get older and I have to go to work, I'm really nervous about modest dress, limiting me and, limiting my worldly goals. So this kind of gives them some advice on Allah's rulings over your desire, when it comes to whatever is on trends, and gives you, that is what gives you true success when you follow Allah. There is an entire chapter on this section or on that topic of nafs and desires, which will be discussed in level 4, but it's briefly mentioned here as well. And there also is a very common remark on, I don't feel religious enough to dress in accordance to Islamic dress. So this highlights also how hijab is not for a perfect Muslim. No Muslim is perfect, that it comes as a ruling of Allah, and kind of gives them some confidence and guidance in that. And there's an activity on how can I begin my modesty journey, and what types of steps are you taking? And then finally is of course, a discussion on inner modesty, that this is, modesty is so much more than how you dress. Inner modesty is to be modest in our thoughts, our speech, and behaviors, and it's the greater form of modesty that we are to uphold with ourselves and with others and with Allah. This chapter then concludes with a chapter review, gives a little bit of testing to ensure that our students understand the material, gives them some opportunities to reflect on the information as well. So we'll go ahead and if you have any questions or comments on this chapter, please let me know now. I'll let you guys take the mic if you're interested before we move on to the next chapter. So any questions or comments here?
Brothers and sisters, and Jazakumullah khair for listening. It's your chance. If you have any questions, post your questions in the Q&A section or in the chat section, or you can even raise your hand so we can give you the ability to speak with the author and ask her directly. It's your chance. Jazakumullah khair. Doctor, we have a question by Sister Lama. Do we teach this section in separate settings for boys and girls?
Yes, so there is going to be a teacher's manual that's going to be coming out for all of the levels. It will be a digital copy online, and part of that teacher's manual explains how to teach your level. So there's a teacher's manual for every single level. What you'll find in the teacher's manual for level 2, inshallah, is a encouragement and a recommendation to separate teaching level 2 by gender, and inshallah to be able to find a same gender teacher to teach this content. This will not be a recommendation for all of the levels, but for this particular level, I do highly recommend that you separate by gender and that the male youth have a male teacher and the female youth have a female teacher, inshallah.
Another question, Doctor. Thank you very much. Another question by Sister Khitam. Will this book will be taught as Islamic studies or health class?
So again, as mentioned in the manual, there will be a guide or there's a pacing guide and there's a chart and some advice on how or where to teach this material. My personal recommendation is that you create a health class, a separate health class, and it could be for 1 or 2 credits a week, and you teach this textbook in that class. If for some Islamic schools, if they're not capable of being able to make that type of arrangement, then there is an alternative option to incorporate these levels in Islamic studies, amongst other classes as well. So depending on your institution and how that would work, there will be guidance on that in the manual.
Jazakumullah khair, Doctor. Like we have like more questions. Like which grade should we teach this level?
So the level books, they recommend at the ages of 11 and up. So that would be at the 6th grade level, the middle school level. However, it is very softly, it's a very soft recommendation. So if you feel that, for example, level 2 is more appropriate at the 5th grade level, and you feel you know your community, your school, or your masjid, wherever you are choosing to teach it, that they will benefit from it and they have the maturity and you have the consent from their parents, by all means, please teach it at an earlier age level. But we do recommend at the 6th grade level, inshallah.
The question was by Qurrat al-Ain, Sister Qurrat al-Ain. Jazakumullah khair. Last question by Sister Lama. Should we teach both sections to girls and boys separately? Do girls need to know the development for the boys and vice versa?
Because the book is written in a way in which there is not a section for the boys and there's not a section for the girls. You've noticed that they are taught in sync, right? They're taught simultaneously. The purpose of that is so that when the males when the male youth are reading level 2, they are not skipping over the female section. They are to be learning the female section as well. And same with the female youth, that as much as they learn the female side of things, they should also be learning the male side of things. It is important and it is essential that both understand what is going on with the other side.
Last question by Sister Tahar, and then we can continue, inshallah, Doctor. In the previous version, F was recommended for age 9. Now it's age 11. What was the reason for change?
In the first book, this was a self-published book that I had written, and I wanted it to be accessible at the 4th grade level because a lot of youth experience puberty starting at the 4th grade level. But we've decided with this book series just to make sure, and this is something why we have left it open, that if you decide that you want to teach these levels at an earlier age, please, by all means, do so. You can begin even as early as the 4th grade level, but we've given a age recommendation of 11 as a means of security and a means of being having good consent with the schools and with the parents, that it would be appropriate at the middle school level. So since that begins at age 11 for most schools, that's why the age range has changed.
Doctor, inshallah, let's continue. Inshallah, we can answer the rest of the questions at the end, inshallah. So we have time to finish the material, inshallah. Go ahead.
Okay, Jazakallah for your questions. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Reproduction and Menstruation. Now, fertility was briefly introduced in chapter 1. This chapter goes into more depth at the middle school age level. Menstruation is also reserved for this chapter as well. It makes more sense for menstruation to follow the topic of reproduction because these are two highly connected. So it's very easy to understand the purpose of menstruation after learning about reproduction. So this chapter includes the following 4 sections. Section 1, reproductive anatomy. Section 2, reproduction. Section 3, menstrual cycle. And section 4, fiqh of menstruation. There is a brief introduction before the sections begin that define reproduction as the process where organisms make more organisms like themselves, and that in order for reproduction to occur, both the male and the female reproductive systems need to come together in such a way for reproduction to occur. 2 males cannot make a baby, 2 females cannot make a baby. So it's to solidify that understanding in our youth, because in the society that we live in, some actually question that and don't have a proper understanding of how reproduction occurs. And there are some verses in the Quran that provide that evidence as well. To really understand reproduction, one needs to first understand the reproductive systems. In other words, male and female anatomy. So section 1 begins by describing the male reproductive system. This is the image that we have chosen to include. It's a very simplistic image of the male reproductive organs. They are labeled, and this is just the image here, but in the textbook, it provides information on what these parts are, how they function, how they work together, and their purpose. And there's also some activities here just to ensure that the explanation has been clear and understood by all of our youth. Similarly is the female reproductive system as well, some activities. And what we'll find if one learns the reproductive anatomy in a public school textbook is the images tend to be quite graphic. They tend to be much more explicit. It was important to include an image of the reproductive anatomy, but we did so by choosing images with haya and modified and edit them in such a way where they would encompass that whilst also being able to learn. Now, since we discussed reproductive anatomy and labeled it male and female, there is a box that goes into, given our social climate today, that many teachers will anticipate a question on gender identity. So there is a box here that explains how Islam views gender and biological sex as synonymous terms. The discussion of gender identity, as well as the whole LGBTQ discussion, it is reserved for level 5. It will be extremely detailed. It has also been content edited by Dr. Wahid Jensen, alhamdulillah. But I wanted to ensure that we have a discussion in this particular level. So that's why there is a box included. It kind of briefly explains that as well. Now, for reproduction to be possible, The section 2 goes into the process of reproduction. It explains sexual intercourse and its potential outcome being a baby, and it discusses this again at a very biological level. So it mentions how this male sperm will enter the female vaginal canal. It will look for the egg, and if they come together, then they will then embed in the uterus and grow as a baby. So very mechanical, very biological, but also explaining the process of sexual intercourse at this age range. Section 3 then goes into the menstrual cycle. Most discussions on menstruation to youth, they leave out the purpose of menstruation. So a lot of female youth wonder, why am I having a period? What is the point of this? And there's always this lack of explanation on why it's occurring. The purpose of menstruation is to prepare a female body for a pregnancy. Hormones in the female body, they go up and they go down in a 1-month cycle. And there's 2 major preparations that the body does. Number 1 is that it releases an egg from an ovary. And number 2, it creates a lining around the uterus to prepare that potential fertilized egg to embed in. When these 2 preparations are set, then a female body is capable or ready of potentially becoming pregnant. Simply has to wait for sperm. So if sperm fertilizes the egg, then that fertilized egg will embed in the uterus, her periods will stop, and she will be pregnant for 9 months. If sperm does not fertilize the egg, then that egg is going to leave the body, and that leaving the body and its process of leaving the body along with that lining is menstruation. Section 3 then continues on and it mentions what the menstrual cycle is. The text will go into detail about what is occurring in all of these phases. Menstrual phase is the menstruation. Follicular phase is the egg coming out of the ovary, the lining being made. The ovulatory phase is the phase in which the egg is waiting for the sperm. And the luteal phase is the egg and the lining leaving the body, getting ready to leave the body because there was no fertilization. And then there are several activities to ensure that this information has been clear and understood for our youth. Section 3 then goes into the process of menstruation, not the process, dealing with menstruation. So it mentions how before one develops their period, they may develop certain types of symptoms when it comes to menstrual products. The text goes into detail about all of the different types of products that are on the market today. Some of these products are reusable, chemical-free, biodegradable. Others have chemicals, are disposable. Some have a higher risk of infection, like urinary tract infection and toxic shock syndrome. Some products are safe for some females, some are not for others. And so it explains some of the variation there. It also explains some of the Islamic rulings around some of these products. And then it closes by a paragraph which mentions that at your age range and your stage of life, that menstrual pads offer the least risk of infection, and they are what is recommended for your stage of life, and to buy chemical-free or the cotton-only ones to reduce one's risk of infection. It encourages female youth to consult with their family and their medical health provider to learn more about what may work for them. There is also a box on menstrual hygiene that talks about some of the common fears and issues that young Muslim youth, our female youth may worry about or have experienced, such as leakage or spotting, smell, rashes, and how to discard menstrual products appropriately. This section then closes off with talking about how our female Muslim youth, how they can anticipate when their period is coming next. So learning about tracking the cycle and then a little activity on that as well. Also discusses what a regular and an irregular cycle is and reasons for why that may be occurring. It does include briefly how when one begins their period, usually takes 2 to 5 years for a period to regulate. So it's very normal if it's a light period or if one does not experience a period every couple of months. That's very normal in this stage, but eventually it should regulate. And there's also some guidance on seeking out a healthcare provider if you have certain types of questions or have concerns about your cycle. Of course, we don't want a teacher to be put in the situation where they're have to answer those. So always, deferring to an expert when it comes to that and avoiding answering any of those types of medical questions. Section 4 concludes the chapter with the big discussion on fiqh of menstruation. Now, there's going to be a lot of fiqh in this level book series. And so I felt it important to first include, this is the first time that fiqh is being discussed. Level 1 did not have a fiqh discussion. So it was important to me that we take a moment and describe to our youth what fiqh actually is. What does it mean? Why are there differences of opinion? If there are so, how does Sharia differ from fiqh? So there's about 2 pages that highlight and discuss what fiqh means. After which it then goes into fiqh of menstruation. The menstruation is a matter that Allah has written for the women as a natural part of the reproductive process. It may feel uncomfortable or painful or inconvenient at times, but when you reflect on the blessings, it's a lot easier to handle. And being able to menstruate means, inshallah, being able to have a baby one day. The text also goes into comparing Islamic's view on menstruation, a very positive view, with that of other faiths. There is some verses in the Old Testament that talk about menstruation as a punishment towards women and how that can impact one's feelings towards menstruation. And then it compares it to the Islamic view, which has a very positive view. There is a box that talks about some of the cultural stigmas that our youth may experience depending on the cultures that they come from, such as that menstruating women are dirty, or you can't touch them or eat near them or share food with them. And so there's many ahadith that refute those, as well as intimacy with one's spouse. There is some ahadith that refute that stigma as well. And then, of course, going into the prohibited acts of menstruation. Essentially, when it comes to prohibitions of acts of worship, is that when one becomes ritually impure, they cannot engage in certain acts of worship until they become pure. So if someone uses the bathroom, for example, they are ritually impure, and they can engage in salah after they have performed a minor purity, which is wudu. Very similarly is wudu. Is menstruation. That menstruation is a major ritual impurity. And one is to perform ghusl once it is finished as a means of being able to go back to certain acts of worship. This is highlighted here as a means of separating or distinguishing ritual impurity from spiritual impurity, that a Muslim is never spiritually impure, that you as a person, you are not impure, that there is ritual impurity, that there are certain acts of worship you cannot engage in. And when you don't engage in them, inshallah, it is rewardable for you as you are following a ruling of Allah. As one of the teachers of Damascus mentioned, that her prayer while pure is worship, and her refraining from prayer while menstruating is worship, that all of it is worship. It then goes into the prohibitions. In this text, it mentions the rulings and the evidence behind them. It highlights which of these prohibitions are unanimous and which of them offer or have a differences of opinion, and it shares what those opinions are. The text does not go into pushing one opinion over another. It simply ends with seek out a reliable Islamic scholar to learn more, and leaves it to that youth and their family to have those types of discussions. There is a box that goes into why does Islam have gray areas or differences of opinion or allow for different views, because it's a great way of being able to introduce that discussion when you're seeing it in real time when you're talking about menstrual prohibitions. There's also an activity that encourages our youth to look at what acts of worship can you engage in when you are menstruating, such as when you are in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. What are some things that you can engage in? Then it goes into purifying oneself after menstruation. It talks about how vaginal discharge is very normal and it changes throughout the cycle. And when one is done with their menses, the discharge will appear as white or as none. And so Aisha radiallahu anha, that the female sahabiyat, they would actually show Aisha as a means of trying to understand if they can and cannot pray. We see the value that they had to salah so much that they worried about missing it. And if it was still yellow, Aisha radiallahu anha would say, do not rush to make ghusl until you see the discharge is white. Also is encouraging our youth to know how to track their cycle so they can anticipate when it will be done. But then it explains ghusl and how to purify oneself, and that will be discussed in more detail in chapter 3. And then this chapter or this section concludes with mentioning some of the abnormal issues or unusual issues that may occur when one is on their menses. And the reason why this is mentioned is because a lot of Muslim youth who do experience this, or Muslim women experience, they're not sure if they can or cannot pray. So one example is bleeding outside of one's menses, and that this is istihada, or this is blood which is non-menstrual. And so there is a little chart here that distinguishes it from menstrual flow or menstrual blood. And there's a female Sahaba who did experience this, and the Prophet ﷺ told her that you are to make wudu before every salah, but you can pray. Another abnormality is having a prolonged flow, meaning it's lasting longer than what it typically does. And so some of that flow may be istihada. A female companion experienced this as well. And the Prophet ﷺ said that once you see that distinction, then you can pray. You are to do wudu with every salah. Finally, is just a highlight and mention, there's a box that talks about how our female sahabiyats, and that despite that these questions may have been uncomfortable for them, that they found a way to seek knowledge. We see the value that they had in keeping their salah. It was something that they valued very much, and they didn't want to miss a salah. And so they would ask with haya. They would either ask a wife of the Prophet ﷺ to ask on her behalf, or they would ask with haya. And so this is just to encourage our youth that even though you may have an uncomfortable question or you're concerned about something, find a way to ask with haya, and always allow yourself to learn and seek that knowledge. The last activity in this chapter is, why does learning about menstruation, why is this important for men to learn about? What is the value that comes with teaching our Muslim men, our Muslim males, about the concept of menstruation? This gives men the ability to make excuses when they see a female not praying or fasting, that she may be on her menses. Muslim male youth are better informed about their female family members, about sisters in faith, when they get married, when they have children of their own. They have a better understanding of the process of reproduction. Menstruation is highly connected to reproduction, and especially wanting to have a baby one day gives them a good understanding of the best time to get pregnant, gives them an understanding of that cycle. I will mention that when it comes to all of these activities, all of the answers, there are activity answers, and they will be included in the teacher's manual. So there will be a way for teachers to have a better informed discussion in the classroom. They will have answers provided. And this is a chapter review on this chapter. So I'll take any questions or comments you may have before we move on to the last chapter of this level. So I do see a couple of the questions in the Q&A box. One question by Sister Kura Tulain, which is, we have started health lessons at our school. So should we teach this level at the beginning of the year, in the middle? Should we start with soft topics first, make them comfortable, and then do this level? What do you suggest? My suggestion is that you mentioned that we have started health lessons. So if you have already started health lessons at your school, your students may feel comfortable. If you feel that this is an important topic they learn in the moment now before they move on to the next grade, then I do recommend you go ahead and get started on this. However, if you feel that it would be better to start at the beginning in terms of level one is a great warm-up because it doesn't talk about anything too sensitive. Then you can discuss level one and then move on to level two, inshallah, as you know your community the best. Sister Marwa asks, is it necessary to ask for parent permission before having this discussion with students at school? Absolutely. The teacher's manual is going to include a consent form that the school or the Islamic institution is to provide to parents of those students, so that the parents are informed on what topics are going to be covered. And in my experience, Not a single parent has refused. They are very gracious and they are yearning for our Islamic institutions to teach this material to their children. And they also value the information very much and feel much more comfortable when the institution keeps them informed and helps them or informs what is going to be talked about. Also allows for the parents to be a part of the discussion. You're only going to get these students for maybe an hour or so at a time talking about this, but the parents really need to continue this conversation at home. So yes, and there will be a consent form included in the manual. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to chapter 3.
Last question, Dr. Amber, by Sister Lama. I understand the importance for the boys to know about the female development, but I feel at this age they are too immature to process it. It's just a discussion, I think.
Sure. Sure. The discussion of menstruation, of course, it goes into a lot of detail. So if schools and teachers decide to kind of brisk over it or just want to mention highlight a few key things for the male youth, one big thing that I think is important to highlight to the male youth are the prohibitions. So that way they're informed and they have an awareness of that. There are verses from the Quran, there are ahadith that specifically talk about them. Those verses in the ahadith, they are not just for women to learn about, they're for women and men to learn about. So picking and choosing certain aspects, but going into the overt details about products or PMS symptoms or things like that, or tracking the cycle, I agree. That's not something that one has to go into so much detail about, especially at their very young age. So I would keep it on the Islamic discussion for that purpose. I do see a question about the teacher's guide. Alhamdulillah, we do have a teacher's manual for every single level. It will be a digital copy on the website very soon. We are finalizing it. There also will be activity answers, the consent form, the pacing guide. All of this information will be included, inshallah. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the final chapter of this level, which is hygiene. Hygiene includes the following 3 sections. Puberty and hygiene is section 1. Section 2 is the fiqh of hygiene, and section 3 are common contagious illnesses. The first section talks about puberty and hygiene. There's a lot of hygienic changes that occur once one hits puberty. One major change is acne. Acne is very common because of the high amount of hormones that are running through the body. It's important to tell our youth that this is not going to last forever. It usually tends to have high amounts of hormone within this stage, but inshallah, once puberty is done, the acne tends to normalize. This section goes into some tips on dealing with acne, as well as an activity or a private journal entry to allow youth to kind of express themselves when it comes to feelings of consciousness, self-consciousness, or body image or self-esteem concerns, when it comes to acne or just simply the changes of puberty that can feel very overwhelming. This also goes into body odor, that the surge of puberty hormones can lead to excessive sweating, which breaks down bacteria, which leads to a foul odor. Some tips on how to combat that, talking about the difference between deodorant and antiperspirant, as well as a discussion on the sunnah of fragrances, how the Prophet ﷺ loved fragrances. And so it's a sunnah for men to wear them in moderation, give some advice on doing so. And also for Muslim women that fragrances are permitted when you are with your mahram. Fragrance is a part of the female awra. And so just to highlight and mention that there are a lot of female, Instagram influencers in today's time, and they, promote perfumes and they have companies that they are supporting. And so a lot of Muslim female youth have lost sight on the understanding of when it comes to where one can wear fragrances within our Islamic rulings. A lot of Muslim youth take their Islamic rulings and fiqh from YouTube influencers or social media influencers. So it's important to keep in mind that you are to seek out reliable resources. And then goes into the topic of nocturnal emissions. Nocturnal emissions is one of the signs of puberty. In fact, the word for puberty, al-hulum, means nocturnal emissions. Nocturnal emissions can occur for both males and females. Essentially is just a release of sexual fluid during sexual excitement, and it can commonly occur at night, but it's more common in males. It's important for youth to understand what this is, why it's occurring, that this is a normal and expected part of puberty. It does tend to stop or decrease after puberty. It cannot be controlled or prevented. It's literally happening in the unconscious state of sleep. And so it's important to let our youth know that, don't worry or don't be concerned about it. If you do awaken with this having occur, know what this is and know that one needs to perform ghusl before they can engage in their prayer, that this is considered a major ritual impurity. The second section is on fiqh of hygiene. This talks about how cleanliness is not just for your health, it's also necessary for worship. Islam holds cleanliness, physical and spiritual, in very high regard. Allah has blessed this ummah with an exceptional code of hygiene. No other nation has witnessed a very similar system. So this section devotes and spends time on that. It talks about some of the ritual cleanliness. There's a lot going on the slide here, but just to mention, this talks about wudu, talks about the rulings of wudu. There's a chart on when you need to perform it, what breaks your wudu, how to perform wudu. There also is a graphic that shows how to perform wudu, the benefits of wudu. And then some of the very common questions and remarks that youth tend to have surrounding wudu, questions like, or comments, or firstly, as a reminder, that clean water is a luxury, and so to limit one's water use when performing wudu. There is a remark on performing wudu over one's socks and over the hijab. There's a lot of questions, especially in today's time, on can you perform wudu over nail polish? There's a lot of products today being marketed as water permeable nail polish. There has been research that has found that they are not very effective. And so it's better to avoid wearing nail polish, even the water permeable ones, unless one is on their menses. And so there is some resources provided there too. There is a question about can you do wudu over false eyelashes? That false eyelashes include a glue and the wudu cannot, or the water cannot permeate through. And then enters the whole discussion on, are eyelashes even permissible in Islam? It falls under the, some scholars have said that it falls under the same ruling as using wigs or hair extensions, and so it's impermissible. And then there is a box that talks about foot fungus in the masjid, that use in wudu communal areas. Research has found high rates of foot fungus, and some ways to combat that is to not use those shared flip-flops or sandals that are very graciously and kindly offered, but to avoid wearing them in the wudu area, to not walk around barefoot. The sunnah is to do wudu at home, so it's best to do it in that place. The importance of thoroughly washing the wudu areas, and a couple other things that are highlighted there. Next is ghusl. There's also a similar chart on this, when to perform it, forbidden acts when one is in the state of major ritual impurity, and of course, how to perform wudu. And then is tayammum, how to perform tayammum, why it was necessary. That tayammum means to intend or to want to do something. Tayammum is symbolic, and it is a gift that was given to the Muslims that was not given to any other ummah. And it is a means to be able to pray when one is not or does not have access to water or adequate water. And so therefore we would feel like something is missing in our salah if we didn't do something. And so this is what tayammum is. And then there is an activity as well as a box that offers some videos on how to perform all three of these. The next part of fiqh of hygiene talks about bathroom etiquette. There's several pages on this, and they highlight some of the things mentioned here, such as the dua when entering and exiting the bathroom, the evidence behind avoid facing the qibla, avoid greeting others in the bathroom, sitting down during urination, ensuring privacy, avoiding places that are used by others, cleaning oneself after using the bathroom. Self-grooming etiquette is also included. This highlights the hadith about the acts that one is to perform, that 5 things are a part of the fitrah. So this includes some of the discussion on trimming the pubic hair and the armpit hair, nail trimming, circumcision, facial hair, as well as some other aspects as well, such as the health risks of wearing long nails or growing one's nails long or using fake nails or gelled nails, which is very common in today's time. Some of the societal trends when it comes to facial hair in comparison to the sunnah surrounding it. Hair care and hijab for females who are in the process of wearing hijab, some things to keep in mind to keep one's hair healthy. And then there's also a discussion or a box on oral hygiene, on miswak versus the toothbrush, and some interesting research around that. Fiqh of Hygiene closes with a discussion on spiritual cleanliness, that a clean body is not just our outside, but our inside as well. And as Muslims, we are to strive to keep ourselves spiritually clean. So this gives a brief introduction on the topic of tazkiyah, purifying one's heart through the obedience of Allah. Tazkiyah will be discussed in other levels as well, but this is just a brief opening of it. And then there is a box on one aspect or area that one can improve when it comes to tazkiyah, is ensuring we're using good language, we're avoiding swearing and cursing. And so there's a big box that kind of talks a little bit about that, shares a little about why people swear, the effect that it can have, and some tips to avoid it. And then this chapter closes with section 3, which talks about common contagious illnesses. Level 5, which is the higher level reproductive and sexual health level. This will go into common male and female reproductive health diseases. So just wanted to make that a note for you all, that there will be the male and female diseases that will be discussed at a higher level. So it was omitted here because it's not too applicable at the middle school age range. And of course, you have your chapter review. And that is the conclusion of everything that is in level 2. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments on the chapter on hygiene or anything else, we have some time now, inshallah, for you to answer.
Dr. Amber, جزاكم الله خير for the valuable information. طيب sisters and brothers, and it's your chance now. You can raise your hands, or you can post your questions in the chat section or the QA section, so you can ask the doctor, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. Dr. Amber, we don't have any questions till now, and no one raised her hand or his hand. So now we have the question. Sister Khitam is asking, is there an online classes offered for students?
So I've been asked this in the past in regards to if I would have the ability to teach and offer an online class. This is something that the NORART team and I can discuss in the future. The ultimate goal, however, is for our Islamic schools to be able to take the initiative themselves and teach it on their own. I am one person and only have access to a limited audience, but the goal is that we can share this knowledge and this information with our entire community, and that really requires for me to at least teach and provide as much guidance and tips that I can offer to you as teachers and parents, youth leaders, so that you can take this information and you can teach it, and you can teach it in a way that I won't do as good as you know your community best, your students know you, and so the information will be much more effective if you have the tools to be able to teach it yourself. So there is no online class that is going to be offered unless you as a school, as a community, choose to do that yourselves, with you providing the educator for, inshallah.
Another question by Sister Marwa. Do you recommend bringing in outside sources like doctors or s- or psychologists to discuss these topics with the students, or is it better to make it more private and comfortable with someone for the students know well?
Sure, this is a great question, Sister Marwa. Jazakallah khair. In the teacher's manual, we will be including some tips and guidance. One of which is the encouragement to bring any outside individuals in for to be able to provide further information or to provide more detail or some little bit more extra information. Is a great way. A lot of youth tend to like having an outside speaker coming in and sharing their knowledge. And this level 2, is a great way to bring in a doctor or a health professional in and can talk about certain types of things. Overall, I think a school teacher or a youth leader, what have you, a parent, can be able to provide this information just themselves with the youth, but bringing in an expert in their field to supplement any information is something that we do encourage, and that will be a recommendation on certain parts of this level that you'll find in the teacher's manual too, inshallah.
Inshallah. Another question, Dr. Amber, by Sister Khawla. She's asking, would you be able to teach some topics using YouTube for teachers to have as a resource to students?
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Khawla. I also saw that you wrote, usually Robert Crown is an excellent resource to bring to schools. Robert Crown was the program that I learned puberty from when I went to public school. It was a great resource. The book series does include recommendations and actually includes several QR codes of YouTube videos to supplement the information, secular sources, Islamic sources. So you'll see that throughout the textbook and the teacher's manual as well. That has already been pinned for you in the book. However, if you yourself, find that something would be beneficial that it's not included, I do encourage it too. It always helps to kind of have our youth hear things in more than one way. One recommendation that I do have about that is that you make sure, and I'm sure you are aware of this, but just generally speaking, is that you make sure that you view all of the supplemented resources to make sure that it is appropriate for your classroom, including anything that may not be included in the book series. We've already kind of scouted for that, but if you're going to add anything else, please look it over before you share it with your students.
And we have like a few questions from the attendees about when we will be having like a webinar for level 3, inshallah. It will be scheduled soon, inshallah. We're going to send you a newsletter when we schedule it with Dr. Amber, inshallah. Uh, inshallah. Also, like we mentioned at the beginning, I'm not sure if you mentioned, Doctor, which ages that we teach, like all levels for? Do we teach them for like elementary levels, middle, high?
The book series is recommended starting at the age of 11, so that would be at the 6th grade age range. We do also say that it is a soft recommendation in the sense that if you choose to begin levels earlier than 6th grade, you are welcome to do so. You know your community best. But as will be explained in the teacher's manual, alhamdulillah, a lot of the questions here are in regard to guidance for the educators. And so we are diligently working to make sure that you have that resource. But one of the recommendations there is if you know your community best, that you can be able to begin the levels and make them applicable depending on your grade, the grades that you know of. But age 11 is the 6th grade, so one can presume that you would start level 1 at the 6th grade level. You could do level 2 at the 6th grade level as well. You can continue to move forward to the 7th and 8th grade level, depending on how quickly or at pace you want to move through the series.
طيب, inshallah, جزاكم الله خير, Dr. Amber. Inshallah, most probably, inshallah, we'll be having the webinar for level 3, inshallah, on February 3rd, inshallah, بإذن الله. طيب, a question by Sister Lama. She's asking, so you don't recommend incorporating this curriculum with IS?
I assume IS is Islamic Studies. I leave it to the schools to make this decision. It is always comes with challenges to establish a new curriculum or a new such as a health curriculum in the school. And so if what would work best for your school is that you incorporate it in your Islamic studies program because it's already an established class and that works best for your school, then alhamdulillah, that's a great way to begin it. The ideal format is to have health class as a separate class. And inshallah, that is something that can be established as time goes on. But absolutely, I was just going to say, Sister Lema, that majority of these questions are already occurring in the Islamic studies class already. And so I think a lot of the Islamic studies teachers are well equipped to teach this level because they're already teaching a lot of these topics already. So I will not be surprised if many of the schools start using this series in their Islamic studies class, or if they do create a health class, it's the Islamic studies teacher that is teaching that class. So Sister Lema, I think you're already alhamdulillah, much more prepared for this as well. May Allah make it easy for you.
جزاكم الله خير. Inshallah, we reached to the end, Dr. Amber. جزاكم الله خير for the valuable information. And inshallah, we would like thank the attendees for listening also and thank them for their very good questions, mashallah. Inshallah, watch the upcoming webinars, inshallah. February 3rd, like we mentioned, we'll be discussing level 3, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير لحسن استماعكم. Any word to say, Dr. Amber, before we leave, we end?
Just thank you, Jazakallah khair to Noor, to everyone that attended. For those who may be listening to this recording, may Allah make it easy for you to establish the series. And we welcome and encourage your feedback so we can continue to make some changes as this is a new series and we are still working through the process of incorporating it in our institutions, inshallah.
Inshallah, any of the attendees, inshallah, if you had the books and you have any feedback, would really appreciate if you can call us so we can like send the feedback to the author and she can take into consideration, inshallah, with revising if they are suitable for the books, inshallah. You can share with us your feedback at info, the email address that's mentioned in the chat section, info@noorart.com, info@nwoorart.com, or you can call us at 888-442-5687, extension number 1. It's also mentioned in the chat section. Also, we put the link for the health and wellness series, and also we put the link for the recorded webinars, and this one is recorded, inshallah, will be uploaded to the website soon under the same link. We have 2 webinars now, inshallah. The 3rd webinar is this one. It will be uploaded to the website, inshallah, within a few days. Also, don't forget to use the promotion code. We are going to send to the attendees a promotion code, a thank you gift from Noor Art for 30% discount. So, but it has like an expiration date. So stick to the expiration date, please, because like we cannot extend it. It has like a system. So it expires in a certain time. So it's your chance. If you don't receive the promotion code within a few days, just reach to us to the phone number that's mentioned or to the email address so we can share it with you, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير لحسن استماعكم, and جزاكم الله خير for listening and for your good questions. And we really appreciate the presentation by Dr. Amber. جزاكم الله خير جميعا. We came to the end. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.